are live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second webinar of 2024. I'm Inès, your host, and I'm also the host of Made It Podcast, which is one of the leading entrepreneurship podcasts in Italy. I'm super excited to be here with Manu and Margaret to talk about a very important topic. Today, we're talking about fertility, and this is actually a topic very close to my heart. You might not be able to see it in the video, but there's a very big bump underneath here. I'm 7 months pregnant, and actually thanks to IVF, which is in vitro fertilization, which for our Italian listeners, it's called FIVIT in Italian. And I've been actually very open in sharing my story in the hope of making, this topic a little bit less of a taboo. And by sharing my story and talking to people, I realized just how many young people nowadays are struggling with fertility. I believe the latest statistic is that 1 couple in 4 now needs the help of fertility treatments to get pregnant, but we will discuss this in more detail. So our guests today are Manu Gupta and Margaret Wang. Manu is the founding partner of Blue Lion VC, which is a tech venture capital fund based in Los Angeles and London, and it backs founders that positively advance society. They focus on climate, health, inclusive finance, They focus on climate, health, and inclusive finance, and they invest in seed with tickets ranging from $500,000 to $1 million, and Series A with tickets ranging from $1.5 million to $4 million across the US and Europe. And they have backed 15 unicorns, resulting in 2 IPOs and over a dozen M&A sales. So that's nearly $425 million invested into transformational companies such as Glovo, Revolut, and of course, Rhea Fertility. And Margaret Wang is the CEO of Rhea Fertility, which is a scale-up now that is bringing the power of its integrated ecosystem of services, technology, and partnerships to elevate the end-to-end reproductive health journeys for intended parents globally. Their approach is ecosystem-first, global network of build-by premium clinics with the center of gravity in the massive and growing market across Asia. Thanks to its technology and thanks to its technological platform, they are streamlining workflows, applying leading-edge innovation like AI, machine learning, and blockchain technologies to improve outcomes of fertility treatments. These webinars are hosted by Rancilio Cube. As you know, we invite every month a partner of a fund that Rancilio has decided to invest in. So in this case, Blue Lion VC, and one of their portfolio startups, in this case, Rhea Fertility. So before I actually start asking questions to Margaret and Manu, I wanted to ask Luca, why did you decide to invest in Blue Lion VC? What did you see in them that has made you want to be a part of?
Well, thank you, Inès, and thanks to Margaret and Manu. We are very honored to have them tonight. And I want to say that meeting Manu for me was a turning point. We started after exiting an espresso machine company 10 years ago, investing directly in companies, even big companies in the US. And some years ago, I had the opportunity to meet Manu and starting also a due diligence on a direct deal together. But for me, it was very clear talking with him that I would like to be a partner of his expertise. And what he was doing, what he's preparing to do was very interesting for our family and in the future also for our platform. Some years ago, we started saying that we were looking for people, project, and also performances. And with Manu was, of course, the three of them. In particular, I would like to say that he was always very humble in approaching some discussion about how to invest, where to invest. And for me, was very important. I also tried during this year to help him to scale a little bit also with the Italian community, because for me, independently from the investment side, a person like him is nice that for the Italian families that they get in touch and to try to understand also how to invest in the innovation. And I would like to say, leaving you the floor, that investing in what Margaret is doing is a clear example.
And thank you, Luca, for such kind words. We're very, very honored to be partners with you, and we really appreciate also Luca as part of our LP advisory committee. So he's actually not just a partner, but he's actually involved in steering the ship as well with us. So we thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Luca. And now I'm going to get started with, I have so many questions for the both of you, but I just want to remind everybody that's listening to us from their offices or at home to please put in your questions. We're going to get to your questions towards the last 15 minutes of this hour. So please make the most of this opportunity to have Margaret and Manu and ask your questions. And then we're going to pop them up, as I mentioned, the last 15 minutes. So let's get started. Margaret, my first question is to you. Am I right in saying that 25% of couples are struggling now with fertility and struggling getting pregnant? And actually, as you share maybe the story of how, why you decided to launch Rhea Fertility, the problem obviously that you're solving, if you could also kind of give us, the listeners, some context on the current fertility crisis that we're going through, that would be really useful.
Thank you so much, Inez, and thank you for having me and Manu on this podcast today, because this is really for me getting to share the work that we do. It's really special. So thank you for the opportunity. So you're right. I mean, one, the statistic that you're sharing, coupled with, I'll share just a couple more, right? Over half of all the countries and territories in the world right now have seen declining fertility rates over the past several decades. It's actually halved in the past 70 years. So since 1950, that global fertility rate has gotten in half. Today,
is there an explanation actually? Like, are there any factors that are contributing to this?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of factors. So you have, of course, there's lifestyle, right? Demographic shifts, people waiting longer to have kids, cost of living increasing a lot of these, the wealthiest cities around the world, people feeling like they need to be, both emotionally stable and financially stable in order to build a family, right? Realize these dreams for themselves. On top of that, you still have different countries with different rules, right? So much of when we looked at this challenge, and, one, I'll talk about the genesis of Rhea Fertility and our clinic network, which are called Gen Prime. We really saw a very fragmented landscape. Different countries have different rules. You have to navigate, what you were just saying earlier, right? What are the rules in Italy? It's constantly evolving, right? I now live in Singapore. I'm coming to you from New York right now, but I live in Singapore, and that's where Rhea is based between. And Singapore only just legalized unmarried women to even freeze their eggs last year. But you still have to be married to use IVF, right? And actually, when they talk about marriage, they're actually talking about a heterosexual marriage, right? Heterogeneous, so male and female. And so now you start seeing all the different reasons why, if you have the dream of building a family or having a child, right, intended parents in our ecosystem, it is daunting. You have to hunt and gather for information, maybe through family or friends, maybe online, right? And who knows, there's a lot of information out there. So we really seek to be that end-to-end solution for any intended parent who's seeking to build a family. And that's through our ecosystem of both the physical clinic network. So we're building and buying, just as you mentioned at the outset in your introduction, building and buying these clinics around the world, right? We're centered in the growth region of Asia, but also Europe and the United States and South America. We also have targets there. Today, we have over a dozen of these owned and partnered clinics. And then we apply a layer of technology that really powers them, both for the patient experience as well as for the clinical experience. And that type of, call it ecosystem first, just as you said, right? We think this is a pretty novel way of solving what is a big and ambitious problem, right? There are a lot of players in the space. We like to be more collaborative, and we really see it as an ecosystem-driven solution. But very much so, the trends that you referenced, and also the ones that I'm mentioning here now, those are the biggest. That's the biggest need that we see. And countries are, and I'll get into it later. I don't want to keep going on too many things here, but a lot of countries are also putting in different measures, and companies as well. And I'm excited to share more, because I think the more awareness, the better in the space too.
Yeah, and we talk a lot about climate change, about a lot of like big problems, but I don't think fertility is getting kind of the global recognition to the problem that we're having. Like, I don't think people understand, how big of an issue it's getting at. So it's really, really amazing to see you trying to solve for this. And Manu, you've also had a personal journey with IVF. How has this experience influenced your perspective on healthcare investments and particularly in fertility innovations?
Yeah, let me give you, Inez, thank you for the introduction earlier. And let me give you a little bit of background. I mean, I think just to touch on one point that you made, what is one of the reasons that IVF hasn't gotten the same level of knowledge and awareness in the market as perhaps climate and some of the other sustainability goals that we have? Well, because there was historically a stigma. My IVF journey starts 8 years ago that we started the process. And one of the key factors that we couldn't understand for the life of us is the doctor said, you're unexplained. We've run all the tests on both husband and wife, and it is unexplained why you're not able to have children. And this is really, it takes away a lot of agency. It takes a lot of power. It makes us feel low internally. And so what ended up happening was that we went through our own IVF journey, and through science, God, whatever factors you'd like to claim to thank, we now have wonderful twin boys. They're 8 years old this week. And truth be told, I actually have benefited so much in my life that I've actually exclaimed it at the top of my lungs. I say, this is all the benefits that it has brought to our family. And here's the crazy part about it, Margaret, Inez. The moment that I become a little bit more open, that we have gone through this journey, you cannot imagine, it has become a conduit for other people to feel comfortable. Either they have a family member that has gone through it, they've had others or themselves, such as yourself, Inés, that have gone through it. And I would love, over a longer period of time, that we just see more and more governments embrace that really good parents would like to have children, and we'd like to have science advance to be able to facilitate that.
Yeah, it's been such a taboo subject for so long. People who were doing it were not sharing it. People were not talking about it. And it was something to be a bit of ashamed, and it's so nice to see how the conversation is starting to change and how people are becoming, I think, since probably the global pandemic, actually, where a lot of women started freezing their eggs. That's when I really started hearing about it. Maybe because I was also close to turning 30 in that moment, which is, is a time where, as a woman, if you're single, or if you're still not ready to have kids, you might be thinking, okay, I'm at that verge where I'm still young, but let me do it now. And we were sharing, maybe we can give Margaret, you can give some examples. You talked about it at the beginning. The hard part is that every country has its own rules, right? So I remember I'm based in the UK, where I think actually the rules were pretty much, it was all very easy to do. So I don't think it has changed. It's also the country where IVF was actually created, right? If I don't get
1978, baby Louise. That's right, Inez. Yeah.
But in France, up until I think 2 years ago, you couldn't freeze your eggs unless you had a medical condition like ovarian cancer or something where, you would be prevented from, or you would have basically a medical condition, and not because, you were getting older, maybe single and not ready to have a family. And then once they opened it up to everyone a couple of years ago, they've received so many requests that actually they can't even handle them. So if you want to give us a few examples like that you were dealing with, maybe even just in Asia, as you said, there was a...
Well, yeah, I'll just also, maybe first I'll also respond or add on to one of the things that both you and Manu just mentioned, which is this is probably one of the most human businesses that you could possibly be in, right? Think about it. I'm helping people have children, right? Or bring life into this world. And at the end of the day, I actually can't guarantee anybody a baby, right? That actually is not the, call it the thing that is, of course, the most positive outcome for them if that is what they want. But the thing that we can guarantee is a better care experience and a higher quality care experience, right? And a much more elevated way of actually navigating this journey with more support. Because it's highly vulnerable, right? It can be anxiety inducing. All of the words that you both use, right? Manu mentioned, you felt a little low, right? Inez, you're talking about the anxiety of turning this age, right? And wondering if I can have a child. And so that for us is very much, the mission and vision that we have, which is we bring that intended parent. We hold them through this process, and then ultimately on the other side of it, hopefully they feel like they got the best standard of care, especially in Asia and the markets that we target. Now, for the question that you have around the different countries, same actually as what you just referenced for France, I mentioned it also for Singapore, right? Up until last year, unless you had a medical condition, you couldn't freeze your eggs if you weren't married. China, right? One of the largest markets in the world, that's exactly the rule right now. If you're an unmarried woman in China without a medical condition, you actually can't freeze your eggs. Every year, China exports 500,000 IVF cycles. Every year they export that many. People are leaving that country to go seek out high quality care around the world. Now, to your point, the UK, United States, other parts of Europe, right? Of course, Spain, right? Greece. There have been these hubs of strong fertility treatment because of the advent of technology like, right, IVF, and then, thereafter, some as well. Now in Southeast Asia, right, Southeast Asia and broader Asia, that is still relatively nascent, right? The rules are still coming online, right? Countries like the Philippines, I'll use the Philippines as a quick example, a country of 100 million people, that entire country only has 9 clinics today. You contrast that with Taiwan, has 25 million people, they have over 100 clinics in that country. And so you already start seeing, and you fly Manila, Philippines to Taipei, that's a couple hours of a flight, right? You now already see why you have different countries with different rules, also different access to different resources. And then let me talk about the technology side of it. You have to believe there's varying levels of quality of training and education, and of course, access to certain equipment, right? So we see that. We look across the whole world and we see the whole benefit of us being global first, ecosystem first, is we now have this view, right? Countries do operate in individual silos. You're talking about each country having rules to incentivize or motivate people to have children. Japan just did this, right? Japan just said, if you want to freeze your eggs, we'll subsidize it. And they were shocked when they got outsized demand, and then they ran, I think they capped it at 200, which you have to think, right? In Tokyo, that's going to be far above that. And South Korea, which has the lowest fertility rate in the world, they have companies paying, I think, up $70,000 for families to have children. And so, that type of subsidy or just call it money in the pocket is not on itself sufficient, right? You need infrastructure support, you need an ecosystem, and you need people on both the public, social, and private sides to really be collaborating. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the partnerships that we also have that we'll be announcing soon too in the coming weeks. But we partner with universities, leading medical research institutions, nonprofits that focus on the space. And I really think that is, if anything, I hope out of this session, it really is a call to action for folks to engage more and also spur that type of collaboration.
Yeah, and the only thing I could add to what Margaret's saying is that historically, I'm speaking from my own experience and some of the diligence that we've done in the 7 years prior to us making this investment in Rhea, but a lot of the clinics weren't necessarily managed for technology of the infrastructure. They were managed more for the science that resided in the lead doctor's head or the lead embryologist's head. And of course, they would use a lot of the tools that they had available to them, the latest medicines. But what I meant is it wasn't necessarily the latest and greatest AI tools or software platforms that were really powering a comparison of live birth rates between one geo or another geo and being able to compare and contrast what different clinics are doing. There wasn't as seamless communication between different clinics. And so I think, I think what's really happening now in the benefit of Rhea is that because Rhea actually partners with the clinics, it's different. It's not like a software technology provider trying to sell into the clinic, please buy my software, please buy my. It's actually a true partnership with the clinic. We actually get a lot of data back from them. We actually can implement our technologies, but actually really influence how they use that technology. And I think that's one of the key differentiating factors for Rhea.
Yeah, Manu, he's exactly right. I mean, one, you have to imagine, we acquired this AI embryo quality assessment tool out of Israel, Embryonics, right? And so they were trying to sell into individual clinic groups, or individual clinics is highly fragmented. That's a really tough sales job, right? And on top of that, they're really product and research focused. Now they've created something great. So by acquiring them onto our platform and with the clinics that we also own ourselves, right, we can put that now directly into the hands of embryologists, right, to help them triangulate the decisions around the quality of these gametes. And for us, that's shortening that product development life cycle because immediately we can put them into the market, right? They're now getting a great feedback loop by the very users who are using them now. And then because also the developers are now on our team, right, we now also can create something that is world-class with that flywheel. And ultimately, if I believe that is world-class in my clinics, right, I will certainly want other clinic groups to also have access to this technology too. And so today we're really trying to, one, integrate thoughtfully, right? Helping people come into the ecosystem, not only just providing great clinical service, but also great access to this type of value-added technology. And then, over time, we continue broadening our scope too within reproductive health services as well.
And we mentioned it a little earlier, how you decided, from your strategy was to go global from day one, which is unusual because usually people start in one market and then they kind of just start, internationalizing. What were the strategic advantages of this decision? And have there been any challenges? I imagine the regulations obviously is one of them, but yeah, if you can kind of talk us through the process of going global from day one.
Have there been any challenges? That's a great question. Yes, yeah. So why don't I start with the challenges and then I'll talk about the benefits and why we chose to do that, right? I mean, challenges you can of course imagine, right? Building a business in Singapore versus like Manila, Philippines versus Bangkok, Thailand versus Thessaloniki, Greece, right? I mean, these are all of the places that we are, right? So versus like Mexico City or New York. Each of those places, right, have different rules and regulations, different cultural norms, ways of being, different ways of doing business, right? And so, some places we have to be very nimble for that reason. That's hard, right? I had one of our investors share with me, they said, Margaret, you have to be really intentional about which markets you add outside your core focus, because any market you add complexity, and not linear complexity. It's actually geometric complexity. Right? It's not just, I add one, so I have to think about this thing. I add one, I have to think about 10 more things. And so while we are global, we are highly intentional about which markets that we are in. And it's really to enable access to the key services that we see in our target addressable market for our clients and patients. And so that I want to really land home there. And then two, the other challenges are, of course, you always have language challenge and just, again, right, the interpersonal, right? Sometimes the interpersonal is even harder than, I rely on like a local, regional, and a local team too, global, regional, local, all three of those groups, you must, right? And the key stakeholders, governments and private companies and public and nonprofits too. And so we really take a collaborative effort there. So that, that of course, is to help mitigate those challenges. And then three, I mean, the biggest one that I know is on top of many investors' minds, and of course, anybody building a business in this world today, we're living in an increasingly polarizing world, right? Increasingly, everybody is just finding these ways to, others, right? Others, or find differences. And yet, again, we believe we're in the business of one of the most human businesses in the world. And so how do you actually now think about something that's much more integrated, much more bridging in an increasingly polarizing world, right? And so I'm not even going to, call it hit the thing over the head with the socio-political, right, tensions around the world, right? Each conflict region, I just mentioned, we acquired a company out of Israel, right? Like, of course, this is during these past several months, we're doing these deals and also working with the team and supporting the team there. These are the challenges, of course, that we're facing as a global company. But why, what do we get out of it? I mean, this type of view across the world and seeing now who has the best in class technology, right? Who's thinking about standardization, operationalizing their clinics in a high quality way, right? Can I take the standard operating procedures over here and adapt them here? And now I've elevated not just my clinics, operating procedures, but now I've put in competition. And hopefully now that elevates the markets, right? That's the mission. Now I get to look across and I get talent where I feel like I can get the best people, the best investors, the best advisors, and the best operating team. That's a luxury, right? We can have a highly, call it core leadership team, but then a very remote workforce that bring the best and brightest of, call it, one of our advisors is like an ex-Kindbody founder, right? They're like one of the largest companies in the United States focused on this space, right? Another one actually delivered the first IVF baby in Hong Kong, right? I mean, that, he actually studied in the UK and Canada, right? Right around the time of baby Louise being born, as you mentioned at the outset, Inez, right? Universities like Baylor College of Medicine, right? They're head of urology, right? We think about male infertility just like we think about female, right? And so these are the brains behind, right, supporting us and also being that expertise in triangulating. That I do think you get from being global first. And the last thing I'll say, because I actually mentioned this to a group of entrepreneurs last week, is when you are global first, you are also thinking about how to build for scale from day one, right? If I was just in one market and then one day I had to figure out how do I take these financial standards to GAAP reporting standards, right? GAAP reporting standards, or how do I think about this type of patient data privacy law, but now I have to think about this other one, right? GDPR, HIPAA, you name the acronym, I've thought about the acronym, right? But because we're global first, I have to think about this in advance. I have to anticipate and visualize. And now we can phase out the way in which we want to grow our business. Otherwise, I will get stuck. I'll get stuck in one market. I'll get stuck in one region. And so for me, that is definitely the challenge of it, but also tremendous. I mean, it's tremendous fun. This has been the most meaningful work, but also a lot of fun to get to build too, to solve for these problems. I mean, it's true, right? Yeah.
It's so wonderful to be able to combine, business and obviously impact. And as you said, it's one of the most human experiences, and it's also one of the most fragile experiences. I'm sure Manu can relate to. You go there, you have no control over what's happening, and you can get treated a certain way or feel completely like that it's just a business for somebody rather than being like a human experience and being very fragile.
Oh, let's just talk about the terminology in this space. I'm over 35. I'll be very public. I know this is a public, webinar here. I'm over 35 years old, right? I froze my eggs 5 years ago after I was engaged, right? This is my personal fertility journey. The terminology for women like me is geriatric mother in the industry. I am geriatric by the industry that I'm
5-year-old. It's like a term that you would give it like a really
Pull the audience. Tell me who thinks I look geriatric on this call, right? You tell me. But right, that is the terminology, and that is what is legacy in this space, right? There are other words in the space too, right? To Manu's point, unexplained infertility, unexplained infertility. Think about a combination of words that could be more ambiguous or anxiety-inducing, right? So for us, when we think about also like equipping and empowering people with, call it, not just a community, but also information and content, but then also that journey itself and helping them navigate it. Yeah, I mean, that is very much so like we are thinking top of mind of just how, the lexicon, right? The terminology in the space too.
The one other area that I would love to touch on, Margaret, is also just the cost element of it.
Oh, yeah.
As you can imagine, I think there's a benefit with very many large tech companies, especially in the United States, being forward thinking and actually financing this for women. But I will say that many countries, many geographies, in our diligence, we found that nobody was there to finance it. And this is a very costly procedure. I have to tell you, I mean, I make a joke about it, but if the doctor were to say to me, Manu, we're going to charge you 1,000 extra for this particular procedure, or Manu, we're going to charge you 2,000 extra for XYZ, what would I have said? I'm sorry, I'd like to shop around.
Yeah, that's right.
Sorry, maybe I'll pause until you're having a discount.
Yeah.
Absolutely not. It's an inelastic purchase, meaning we will purchase the service on top, and it is a very expensive, very, very expensive. And so I always make the joke when the doctor asks me if I'd like to put in 1 egg or 2, their recommendation was only to do 1. And I said, I'm absolutely not paying for this thing twice. But
it's you have to think about those things, especially in some countries where it's extortionate, the amount that it costs compared to maybe others. Again, that's also I imagine the gap in costs between countries is massive.
There are.
Yeah. So now, Inez, just to your point, now with a global network, the way that Rhea is doing it, could you imagine that we actually help support down the line medical tourism that says, hey, look, in your country, this is how much it costs. But if you book a flight, we'll set you up with the hotel. We'll set you up with all the services surrounding your treatment. And you know what? We'll actually be able to save you a tremendous amount of money, and the regulatory environment is completely supportive of you and your journey. I think we have to be able to facilitate that. The ability, again, for having a global network like Margaret does is that you can actually compare and contrast different cost structures in different locations. So now if one of our clinics is operating at a, let's call it single-digit EBITDA margin, but we realize that another clinic is wildly profitable, well, let's take all the learnings and let's immediately push it into the first clinic. Maybe we can actually bring down the cost also and share some of that savings back with the consumer.
Yeah, and we do that exactly. Thank you, Manu. That is such a great point, because I think this is true of the business that I am building, that we are building, but it's actually, something that other global businesses can also very much either already do or they learn from too, right? So for the first two clinics that we acquired, for example, right, the one in Thailand and one in Malaysia, we actually saw a different mix of patients, right? One had more medical, one was 70-30 medical tourism, and then also, and then domestic demand. The other one was flipped. So then we said, well, what can we learn from each, right? And we want a much more balanced patient base. We want one that's a little bit more like half and half, right? Folks coming in from outside the country and folks from within the country. And this is intentional, again, because there's a lot of latent demand in the markets that we're targeting, especially in Asia, but also abroad too. But also, the pandemic is not that far off in any of our memory, right? When borders shut down, you need strong domestic demand, right? Only when borders are open can you now also allow for this type of medical tourism. And we support it because not just for the cost differential. So if you are price sensitive, you can go between the United States, right, and Mexico, or Singapore and Thailand, right? Like, these are real examples of people actually going across, or of course, just even because of the rules too, the regulatory differences, right? Up until last year, you go over to Malaysia to freeze your eggs if you were a single woman. That's what you just did. That you could just drive over the border. You can start your hormone treatment in one place. You started in Singapore, and you just drive over. Now in our network, right, we also have a global and local, they call it global and mobile population. You can also imagine a world where you start that hormone treatment in one market, and then you go elsewhere to retrieve it and freeze it. We see that all the time. I just saw that with actually a patient between Singapore and Manila, right? We see that all the time.
Yeah, my sister-in-law was saying because of the recent regulation in France, and the fact that now they'd allowed and they sponsored, they were actually like the government was covering for the cost of egg freezing for women. Obviously, the clinics couldn't handle the demand, and so what they're doing now is they're paying for you to do the egg retrieval. So you could do, as you said, you could do the hormone part in France, but then the egg retrieval has to happen in Spain in her case.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, you know, this medical tourism, which is something that actually happens a lot. Like a lot of, for example, hair loss for men who do reimplantation. There's like, I think Turkey is like one of the biggest countries attracting people for doing that. But you forget how much, like, there's also all of that interconnectedness, you know, in between, you know, obviously, because when you have to
cosmetic medicine, for sure, right? I mean, you've seen that in different places. And I think here the difference is probably, you know, one, we really only, the services that we have in the respective markets are what are legal, right? There's a lot of gray area, and there's a lot of like underground services in places where it isn't legal. So surrogacy in most of Asia, for example, is not legal, right? It's not. We will never do something that is illegal in the countries that we operate in. And so by giving them options in other parts of the world where it is legal, you are now, again, elevating that experience. You're giving that surrogate mother, the gestational care, much more dignity, right? A much more dignified experience. There's much more regulated, so there are more protections in place. And also the parents can feel more at ease too. That to us is also a big benefit of honestly being able to operate and connect in this way. Because until you do, and there aren't many players who do this. In the United States and Europe, there are large players today that have connected across markets, right? I mean, EVRMA, right? Eugen Group, right? Kind Bodies, Spring Fertility, CCRM. These are the known large clinic groups. In Asia, it's still relatively nascent. They're either within a single country or a micro-region across 2 or 3 countries. We're seeing more interest now, but we were early in this space, right? To actually start building globally this way. And nobody's also building, call it, across all 3, 4 continents, right? So you can say, Margaret, wow, okay, you're ambitious, and maybe that's the dumbest thing you could be doing. Or maybe we are seeing something that nobody else is seeing here. And we are, and the feedback that we've been getting has been so positive. we ended the year last year in high double-digit revenue overall, and we're positive on the EBITDA front. We're profitable. And that, again, is like, we're building and buying these clinics, and we're also putting in technology. That in and of itself is an ecosystem that we continue to grow and now scale for growth this year and the years after.
The other thing I'd say is that you have so many ancillary revenue streams that we haven't even tapped into. Let's say the clinic is at the center.
Yeah.
And the live birth rate is at the center. But along it, you have sperm donation, egg donation, freezing, testing, and tourism. We can keep naming things where, as we continue to build scale in the center circle, the value that we provide or receive in monetary terms is actually larger and larger. We can have better contracts with all third parties. Maybe we bring some of it in-house, maybe we don't. That's our choice down the line. But the key is the center, the core, has to continuously expand.
Yeah. And that is, each clinic then actually becomes a node in the network, right? A node, like a supply and demand node. And so we think about ways in which we can actually call it reduce the friction, right, between a person who needs a donor gamete and the person who has a donor gamete, right? And that today, it's a very manual process. Like there are PDFs floating around and phone calls being made and, papers exchanging. We see technology being a clear, there's a clear role for technology in these types of gaps. And so it's exciting to us because we really get to look across, and then for certain parts of the value chain, find ways to actually introduce new ways of doing that are pretty powerful.
And Manu, question for you: why did you decide? I'm sure when you maybe were exploring the fertility space, if that was something that the fund was interested in investing in, you might have seen as well other startups. So why Rhea? Why Margaret? What did you see? And if you can also tell us who else is invested in the company, and give us an idea of how. I know we're not going to be able to share like precise numbers, but just an idea of.
Sure. So the way that we look at the world, at least from a Blue Line standpoint, we're only investing in areas that tackling society's hardest problems. Healthcare is absolutely one of them. It's one of the most critical areas where the cost that we spend on healthcare continues to rise across all geographies. And yet we actually haven't found any panacea. We haven't found any one solution that completely kills the problem. We're actually going to continue as a society spending. And so what happens is that within healthcare, we made a hypothesis that fertility would be massive over the next 10 years. We made a hypothesis that even with declining birth rates for a wide variety of reasons, there were still very, very significant numbers of people, families that had unexplained as the reason for their inability to have children. Then there's an advent of same-sex couples, medical reasons, all the factors that you could imagine, women staying in the workforce for longer, companies being able to embrace. So you had a lot of economic factors come together. So we started with the hypothesis, fertility is absolutely going to be massive. Then we went number 2, where do we want to participate? We saw that the US market was very competitive, and it was already reasonably developed. Quite similar for the European markets. And we also did not want to invest in a point solution for just the software, because we actually did some diligence early on. And we found that if we had only the software, only this small point solution, it was very hard to get in front of the clinics. They thought it was important, but they didn't think that that was the mission of their entire life. Their mission of their entire business wasn't to make their clinic run 10% faster. So our view is the best way to achieve this mission of global fertility is you have to both be a partner to the clinic as well as a tech provider. And Rhea, in all of our diligence, was the first company that we actually felt had a mix of both, offline plus online. We think that's mission critical in this particular segment of the market that they're playing. And we had a relationship with Margaret and her partners, and we ended up doing a bit of diligence a little while ago, and we're very fortunate to be early investors in the business with Blue Line Fund 1. It is the largest investment that we've made. We've had to break all concentration limits for Blue Line and get special approvals from Luca and other members of our LP advisory committee to put so much money from our Fund 1 into one company. But here's the key. We did it over time. We got to know them more and more. We kept investing. And we're very fortunate to have around the table amazing investors. As Margaret mentioned, we're at high double-digit millions of revenue for a 3-year-old business. We're profitable. We've now just had Peter Thiel and Thiel Capital come in as a very big investor in the company. You'll see the announcement come out reasonably soon. And then Margaret will make give you some more ideas around the other upcoming announcements that they're doing on the product and the expansion side as well. We're incredibly excited. Now, as a thesis area, fertility for us continues to be important. Now that we have this great network with Margaret and Rhea, how do we keep investing in more and more fertility companies that also might be partners for Margaret? How could this also be a distribution mechanism for our future fertility investments that we make?
Yeah, I can't say enough great things about Manu and his team at Blue Line as our investors, because he's talking about, one, the financial capital that he's put with us and invested with us, but also he and his team have invested time with us, and with me in particular, in being my thought partner, right? Giving me tough feedback, right? To be honest, like today, with what Rhea looks like today and what Gen Prime looks like today, it would not be that way without the insight and the feedback and honest, also hands-on help from folks on Manu's team. And that for me is what I like in an investor. I like somebody who can hold me accountable, who can go back and forth with me. These are tough questions to solve for, right? Building a hard business, solving a big, ambitious problem around the world, building a business that's, global first, ecosystem first, right? And of course, in dealing with many, but we're not the first ones to do different parts of it, but we are the first ones to bring it all together this way. And so for me, working with Manu and in the Blue Line team has been absolutely phenomenal for that reason. And I also, as you can probably tell, I'm very direct, and so I like the open feedback, and that's how we've built trust over time too. And I also do like the way in which he's mentioned, like investing over time, because it holds me accountable to run a much more disciplined business, right? I can't just raise a bunch of money and spend it on, whatever I like type thing, right? Or I can't do something like I want to go buy this expensive, call it equipment or technology or this highly valued clinic, but just for the brand or the name. We are very capital efficient with how we think about buying and building, and also, investing and deploying our own in the space too, to bring on key parts of that value chain to solve the problem. And so for me, it's an absolute joy on that front.
Likewise.
Yeah, it's good. It's good. We got to hang out sometimes too, whenever we cross paths on the same continent. Yeah.
Great to see such a good investor and startup relation. And now I'm going to actually start getting in questions from the audience. We received quite a few really interesting questions. So first one from Andrea Cipriano, who's asking Manu, how do you see the role of venture capital evolving over the next decade, particularly in the context of social responsibility and impact investing?
So great question, Andrea. I'll keep these short because I know we have a number of questions, but by way of background, I was one of the founding members of a venture firm in Europe called Lakestar, and we grew it to a very large size. And then when I spun out in 2020, I thought about, where do I want to spend my own time? What are the areas that I really want to read about, to impact upon society? Where can dollars really be put to work? Where do I see amazing founders want to spend their time, such as Margaret? Where do I see young generation really want to be spending their time? They're attracted to the social and mission-driven types of companies. And so when you add all this together, I think you don't have to have social benefit without making great returns. I think you absolutely can have both together. And I think that the goal here is, sometimes it's an issue of time horizon. There'll always be a great AI company that allows you to sell software 10 times better. And yes, the revenues might grow very quickly. Or there might be another company that allows me to get my food delivered within 4 minutes instead of 10 minutes. But those just aren't the companies that we will invest into. And I don't mind in healthcare waiting an extra year just in case there's a regulatory bump or there's some new innovation in healthcare that causes us to pause and think and implement it amongst all our clinics at Rhea. But we will get there, and we will actually make a tremendous return for our LPs without sacrificing the social responsibility or impact side of things.
Next question comes from Nicola Lorini. This one's for Margaret. You mentioned a relevant geographical dispersion of your business. How does cultural differences impact on the services provided? How do you manage human complexity from a psychological point of view in relation to the geography and hence cultural differences?
Oh wow, Niccolo, this is an incredible question, because you're hitting on the very crux of the business too, right? I mean, maybe I'll just start with a couple examples and build up to the point, because that's also naturally how I think too. So one is, as you can probably maybe assess or discern from my accent. So I was actually born and raised in the United States, in in the Northeast. I was born in Massachusetts, raised in upstate New York, and now I do business right out of Singapore, right, and across Asia, right, in certain countries, right, where even though I'm fluent in Mandarin, right, I don't speak that language, and then certainly also have a cultural difference too. I have a team that spans the United States, different parts of Asia, and also Europe as well. And then not to mention also the patient base, the patient and client base, who are truly global in that way. So when I think about, I'll just start with the first part of this question, where cultural differences impact the services. Of course, in certain countries, it is, we can't even do certain invasive ways of, call it genetic testing, right? So if you have different religious or cultural norms that actually prevent you from, certain types of testing that involves, penetration, we actually don't, we think about what are other ways in which we can do this. We actually leverage AI in some ways to think about ways in which we can solve for this that still get them a high quality assessment of their gamete without needing to use the traditional forms of testing. Like, that's pretty exciting and interesting, right? Or you think about worlds where, you have, call it again, there's, I'll go back to the very earliest point around the taboo. When we think about the privacy that we also focus on for our patients and clients in the physical spaces, right? There's like the physical space, and then there's like the digital realm that we operate in. But in the physical space, you want that type of privacy and care when you walk into these clinics. Unlike other specialty care clinics, right? We are not ground floor storefront type of marketing, right? We think about where to put our clinics so that they are actually, it's private. Nobody necessarily knows that you're going up there, right? You can seek treatment in a way that you feel taken care of, but also, right, if you won't bump into somebody or be known. That absolutely is true in certain countries over others, right? If you look at Taiwan and Korea, actually are very open about the IVF, like marketing and branding. It's on actually like the sides of buildings, right? But then you go to like the Philippines or like Malaysia, and it's like, and they're tucked away into these like office buildings, right? It's like, and you have to go up the escalator and, into a semi-private entrance. We think about this all the time. And then the last part of it is when you say psychological point of view, and the complexity there, I've hit on the cultural differences already. So maybe I'll just focus on one part around the, call it counseling or mental health aspect of it too. Because this for us is also, we take a very holistic view of this type of care. So one example is I actually acquired a TCM clinic, a traditional Chinese medicine clinic in Singapore. We intend to co-locate those services, right? Acupuncture, massages, supplements, things like that, right? Wellness, along with fertility. We also are in conversations with a telehealth mental health service provider, right? They're based in Europe. And this is because, just alongside the very clinical services you need, you're also seeking out sometimes for these adjacent services too. Instead of allowing the person to go hunt and gather for that information on their own or get word of mouth referrals, right? We're saying, hey, we looked across the world for you. We looked across these key pillars that we know everybody asks for all the time. And so we're going to just offer you, call it, certain benefits or extra access, but we support these types of companies in relation to the care that you need. And so it is highly complex for that reason. And, people have a variety. I mean, every person is will have a different set of needs. And so the only thing that we can do is bring forth that type of access in a high quality way and do it on a global scale. I hope I answered your question and the intent of it.
Now there's another question for Manu. According to what you've seen as a VC, which are the latest state-of-the-art tech solutions to address this massive fertility challenge globally?
So I think it's a wide range of solutions. I wouldn't tell you that there's one. Margaret alluded to one already, where you can test for Down syndrome without having to poke a needle into the egg itself. Can you imagine how amazing that would be, where you can use machine learning to actually understand the probabilistic basis of whether or not an egg might have Down syndrome? It becomes far cheaper. It's less invasive. It has obviously less cultural or religious restrictions. There's another area that we're looking at relating to PCOS. PCOS is an ailment that many women face a lot in Asian culture, which prevents them from having the same number of eggs every month. Same number of eggs that are viable candidates. And so we're looking at different technologies that can actually improve that tremendously. I would say that there's so much low-hanging fruit. The only area that I would argue is that it doesn't always have to be state-of-the-art. I think right now we're coming off of a base level where every improvement is about increasing live birth rates. How do we just get more births into the market? What is the probability that we chip away at every step of the IVF procedure such that the end probability is higher and higher that there's a baby at the end of it?
Because I think it's around, I remember from my clinic, they were saying, I don't know if it was age related though, like 60 to 70% live birth rate from embryo implantation. So as you said, Margaret, you can never guarantee 100%. No one can guarantee 100%, but like it's 60 to 70. So it's, it's high, but it's not that high. And so, yeah, everything you can do to improve, to keep on improving that number, and that outcome obviously is going to change. Also the level of the clinic and getting more and more well-known in the space and attracting more people. Another question for Margaret from Massimo Ruffoni. What is the AI impact on the fertility business?
Thank you, Massimo. I love this question too. And I actually was going to bring up this point on the tail end of Manu's response for the last question of state-of-the-art technology. So I'm coming off the heels of, I was actually just at the Ovarian Club conference in Paris, which is a convening of just some of the leading practitioners in the world. I mean, you had Sherman Silber there, who invented ICSI, which is the process of putting a single sperm right into an egg under a microscope. And then Milton Liang, who co-chaired it, he's the father IVF in Hong Kong. And we talked about AI. And actually last week, I was also at a tech conference in Singapore right before that. And we were also talking about AI in the fertility business. This is what I'll share. One, there is tremendous interest in this space right now. I mean, you heard we acquired a business, right, Embryonics, out of Tel Aviv, Israel, who are using it for imaging assessment, right? These egg and embryo quality, and of course sperm and oocyte quality come right after that too. There's people who are thinking about call it ways in which, and our team does this as well, which is what is the optimal window for implantation, right? For transferring the embryo. What is the optimal window for given that, the individual and all of the things that come with that person being unique and differentiated? What is the optimal window? What is the optimal hormone protocol for this person, right? How can it learn from previous hormone protocols? How can it learn from also hormone protocols for an entire mass population of people, right? And so this is, maybe I'll just synthesize this with a few key points. One, data in this space is so important, right? If you have clinics, you have patients, you have access to being able to train. The AI is only going to be as good as what you can train it on, right? So you need data, you need high quality data. So this is one today. So people are thinking about this and marrying that more together. You have large hospital groups interested in this type of technology, finding nascent businesses, right? We are at the very fulcrum of that right now, right? We help them make that happen. Two, there's a great quote that I don't remember who is attributed to, but it may be that AI does not replace the clinician, but clinicians that do not use AI will certainly be replaced by clinicians who do use AI. And I do believe in this, right? I do believe in this because at the end of the day, even though we see it as a triangulating point of decision right now for, you know, an embryologist who's using a human eye through a microscope to assess the quality, why not use technology? Just like any technology we use in our day-to-day, right? Think about just the incredible evolution of what we're on, right? I'm on this laptop right now in New York talking to people, right? In the UK and Asia, like this is incredible to me, right? If I wasn't adopting new technology constantly, right? My own learning and my own evolution would also be stymied. And so I do see this as also encouraging clinicians to be much more curious, encouraging people to develop in this space, and then also encouraging that type of collaboration I was talking about earlier, the private, the public, and the social coming together. And the third one I'll just say, right, and you know, I think there's ultimately there'll be folks who think we can automate the entire process of IVF. And I'm actually more skeptical than not on that, because I do think, and it actually goes to one of the earliest points Manu mentioned, which is Manu was sharing how, as he's been open about his own fertility experience, how then people also share theirs. Now that people know that I work in the space, people share with me all the time about their own fertility journeys, or, you know, the anxieties around family building. And I have to say, it truly is one of the most, I mentioned this, right, vulnerable, like, you know, anxiety driven, but also it can be a great source of joy and human emotion too in that way. And I think truly for that reason, you will always have some type of interpersonal experience with IVF, with call it in the fertility business, right? At some point, you will still want some type of human engagement at whatever point it might be. And that may not be true for all other types of businesses out there, right? Maybe you can replace, you know, call it long haul logistics, right, with all of AI, right? Maybe you can replace, you know, certain analysis and PowerPoint. I would love it if somebody told me one day, you know, I never have to make a PowerPoint slide again, right? AI can do that. But I think in the business of helping people build families and bringing life into this world, I think you will always still have people involved in it too. And so I really think about it, if that's a spectrum, I'm like, you know, I'm very bullish on it. Right? Of course I am, because I've invested and we've brought on businesses that do it, right? I think people who don't use it will certainly be left behind versus the people who do use it. And then also at the end of the day, I really believe in the fact that people will still want that interpersonal experience in some which way, which I think is beautiful, actually, because at the end of the day, I would rather still also talk to people, even though there's some great AI companions out there too.
Yeah, it's definitely a space where we still need humans, as you said, the human touch. Final question, as I know you need to leave, but this is a super quick one. For Margaret, what is the best country in Europe region for using a surrogate mother? Where is it, where it's legal, of course?
We are exploring Greece right now for this very reason, actually. And so I'll just maybe put that out there. I don't know if it's the best country for you, so you should look about what makes sense for you, right? Eastern Europe also has some great options too, but we are also currently exploring Greece. I'll just put that out there as a short answer.
Thank you so much to you both. We're gonna let you go now, but thank you for this super insightful webinar and for answering all my questions and all of our listeners' questions. And wishing Margaret a huge success with your mission. You have a huge goal, but I'm sure you're gonna get there. And it's great to see you know, Blue Lion behind this, and obviously Rancilio Cube backing as one of your LPs.
Thank you so much, Inez. We really appreciate the time and for everything you've done to put it together. Thank you, Margaret.
Thank you.
Thank you, Manu. Thank you, Inez. Thanks.